Your heart pounds against your ribs while everyone around you descends into chaos. The meeting erupts, voices rise, accusations fly, yet you remain perfectly still, perfectly clear, watching it all unfold with the detached precision of someone who knows exactly what to do next. This isn't a fantasy. This is the daily reality for crisis negotiators who maintain absolute emotional control while others' lives hang in the balance. The difference between you and them isn't natural talent or years of meditation retreats. They've simply learned something most people never discover. Emotional control operates like a machine with specific parts, predictable patterns, and reliable overrides. When you understand these mechanics, staying calm becomes less about willpower and more about following a system that works every single time. Chapter 1. The Calm Advantage. Most people believe crisis negotiators possess superhuman emotional strength, that they're somehow built differently from the rest of us. The truth is far more interesting. These professionals often start their careers as anxious, reactive, and emotionally volatile as anyone else. What transforms them isn't personality change, but systematic training in techniques so powerful they can override the most primitive parts of the human brain, the parts that scream at you to fight, flee, or freeze when pressure mounts. The system you're about to learn comes directly from the protocols used in hostage situations, suicide interventions, and terrorist negotiations. These aren't relaxation techniques or positive thinking exercises. These are battle-tested methods for maintaining cognitive function when your brain wants to shut down, for making strategic decisions when your emotions demand impulsive action, for projecting strength when you feel anything but strong. Professional negotiators call this state tactical calm, a specific mental condition where you process information faster, see options others miss, and influence outcomes while everyone else reacts blindly to their emotions. Tactical calm isn't the absence of emotion. You still feel everything: the anger, the fear, the frustration. The difference is that these feelings become data points rather than drivers. They inform your decisions without controlling them. Think about the last time you lost your composure. Maybe someone challenged you publicly, criticized your work, or pushed exactly the right buttons to set you off. In that moment, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logic and planning, essentially went offline. Blood flow decreased to your thinking brain and increased to your primitive brain. Your body prepared for physical combat that never came, leaving you flooded with stress hormones that clouded your judgment for hours afterward. Crisis negotiators face these same biological responses, but they've learned to intercept them before they take control. They use specific physical interventions that restore blood flow to the prefrontal cortex within seconds. They employ cognitive techniques that prevent emotional hijacking before it begins. They've practiced these interventions so many times that executing them becomes as automatic as breathing. The stakes in their world couldn't be higher. A single emotional slip during a hostage negotiation might trigger violence. One moment of visible frustration during a suicide intervention could push someone over the edge. These professionals don't have the luxury of cooling off periods or walking away when tensions rise. They must maintain absolute emotional control for hours, sometimes days, without break. What makes their approach so powerful is its foundation in neuroscience, rather than philosophy. Every technique targets specific neural pathways, hormone releases, or nervous system responses. When you understand why your body reacts the way it does to stress, you can interrupt those reactions at their source. When you know which brain chemicals trigger panic, you can block their release. When you recognize the early warning signs of emotional flooding, you can activate your override system before you lose control. The emotional override system consists of 3 interconnected components that work together like gears in a watch. The first component is physiological regulation, controlling your body's physical stress response through specific breathing patterns, muscle techniques, and nerve stimulation methods. The second component is cognitive redirection, using mental frameworks that prevent your thoughts from spiraling into emotional chaos. The third component is behavioral anchoring, maintaining specific actions and speech patterns that reinforce calm regardless of internal state. Each component strengthens the others. When you regulate your physiology, your thoughts naturally become clearer. When you redirect your cognition, your body relaxes automatically. When you anchor your behavior in calm patterns, both mind and body follow suit. Master one component, and you'll see immediate improvement. Master all three, and you become virtually unshakable. Crisis negotiators don't wait for high-stakes situations to practice these techniques. They integrate them into daily life, using minor frustrations as training opportunities. The driver who cuts them off in traffic becomes a chance to practice physiological regulation. The difficult coworker becomes an opportunity to refine cognitive redirection. The family argument becomes a laboratory for behavioral anchoring. This constant practice creates what neuroscientists call emotional muscle memory, automatic responses that kick in without conscious thought. Just as a martial artist doesn't think about blocking a punch, a trained negotiator doesn't think about managing their emotional state. The override system activates instantly, maintaining calm before disruption can take hold. The advantage this creates extends far beyond crisis situations. People who master emotional override report dramatic improvements in every area of life. They make better business decisions because fear doesn't cloud their judgment. They build stronger relationships because they respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. They achieve more because they waste less energy on emotional turmoil and channel that energy into productive action. Research from hostage negotiation units worldwide shows that negotiators who maintain tactical calm achieve successful resolutions 94% of the time, compared to just 58% for those who experience emotional dysregulation during negotiations. The difference isn't in their negotiation tactics or communication skills, it's purely in their ability to maintain emotional control when others cannot. The same principle applies to everyday conflicts. The person who stays calm while others lose control holds all the power. They see solutions others miss. They think strategically while others think defensively. They build bridges while others burn them. This isn't about suppressing emotions or becoming robotic. It's about choosing how and when to express emotions for maximum impact, rather than letting emotions choose for you. Consider how different your last major conflict might have gone if you'd maintained perfect emotional control throughout. Would you have said things you later regretted? Would you have made decisions that created bigger problems? Would you have damaged relationships that took months to repair? The cost of emotional dysregulation compounds over time, creating cascading consequences that affect every aspect of life. Crisis negotiators measure success not by whether they feel stressed, but by whether stress controls their actions. They expect to feel pressure that's human. But they've built such robust override systems that pressure becomes fuel rather than friction. The same adrenaline that makes most people reactive makes them more focused. The same cortisol that clouds most people's thinking sharpens their awareness. This reversal doesn't happen through positive thinking or willpower. It happens through specific interventions that change how your nervous system processes threat signals. When you know how to manually downregulate your sympathetic nervous system, you can transform fight or flight responses into what negotiators call engage and influence responses. Your body still mobilizes energy, but instead of preparing for combat, it prepares for strategic action. The timeline for developing these capabilities is surprisingly short. Most crisis negotiators report significant improvement within 2 weeks of beginning their training. Full integration, where the override system becomes automatic, typically occurs within 60 to 90 days of consistent practice. This isn't a years-long meditation practice or therapeutic process. It's a skill acquisition program with measurable milestones and predictable outcomes. What separates those who succeed from those who struggle isn't natural ability, but commitment to systematic practice. Every technique in the emotional override system can be learned by anyone with functioning cognitive abilities. The neuroscience is universal. Your brain operates on the same principles as everyone else's. The only variable is whether you'll invest the effort to reprogram your default responses. The military calls this process stress inoculation, gradually exposing yourself to controlled stressors, while practicing override techniques until those techniques become stronger than your natural stress responses. Crisis negotiators take this concept further, using what they call pressure stacking, deliberately creating increasingly complex emotional challenges to expand their override capabilities. Starting tomorrow, you'll begin building your own override system, using the exact protocols from crisis negotiation training programs. You'll learn to recognize the microseconds before emotional hijacking begins and insert circuit breakers that restore rational thought. You'll develop the ability to project calm so convincingly that others unconsciously mirror your emotional state, de-escalating situations without saying a word. The techniques ahead aren't theoretical concepts or general principles. They're specific, actionable interventions with clear instructions and measurable outcomes. You'll know exactly what to do, when to do it, and how to tell if it's working. More importantly, you'll understand the science behind each technique, giving you the confidence to adapt and modify approaches based on your specific needs and situations. Professional crisis negotiators don't see emotional control as a soft skill or nice-to-have capability. They see it as the foundation upon which all other skills rest. Without emotional override, communication techniques fail, strategic thinking collapses, and influence evaporates. With emotional override, every other capability multiplies in effectiveness. The path ahead requires practice, not perfection. Even experienced negotiators occasionally experience emotional dysregulation. The difference is they recognize it immediately and activate their override system before damage occurs. They've failed enough times in training to know that temporary loss of control doesn't mean permanent defeat. They simply reset and re-engage, stronger for having tested their limits. Your training begins with understanding that emotional control isn't about becoming less human, but about becoming more capable. You'll still experience the full spectrum of human emotions. You'll still care deeply about outcomes. You'll still feel the weight of important moments. The difference is you'll experience all of this while maintaining the clarity and control to influence those moments rather than be controlled by them. The calm advantage isn't just about personal benefit. When you maintain emotional control in chaotic situations, you become a stabilizing force for everyone around you. Your calm becomes contagious. Your clarity helps others think more clearly. Your control gives others permission to regain their own control. This multiplier effect is why single negotiators can transform the energy of entire crisis situations. As you develop your emotional override system, you'll notice changes beyond improved conflict resolution. Your decision-making becomes sharper because you're not filtering information through emotional distortion. Your energy increases because you're not wasting resources on internal battles. Your confidence grows because you know you can handle whatever comes your way without losing yourself in the process. The tools you're about to acquire work because they address emotional dysregulation at its source in the interplay between your nervous system, your thought patterns, and your learned behaviors. By intervening at all three levels simultaneously, you create redundancy in your override system. Even if one component fails, the others maintain control until you can fully reset. This comprehensive approach is what allows crisis negotiators to maintain emotional control for extended periods under extreme pressure. They're not relying on a single technique or hoping their training holds. They're running multiple override protocols simultaneously, each one reinforcing the others, creating a virtually impenetrable emotional defense system that preserves their cognitive capabilities when they need them most. Chapter 2. Your nervous system's emergency brake. Your body begins its stress responses 0.07 seconds after perceiving a threat faster than conscious thought. Faster than you can blink. Faster than any decision you might make about how to respond. By the time you realize you're angry or afraid, your nervous system has already released a cascade of hormones, tightened dozens of muscles, and redirected blood flow away from your rational brain. This biological hijacking happens before you have any say in the matter. But what happens next, that's where you regain control. Crisis negotiators discovered something remarkable about the human nervous system. It responds to specific physical interventions as reliably as a computer responds to keyboard commands. Press the right buttons in the right sequence, and you can override even the most intense stress response within seconds. These aren't relaxation techniques that might work if you practice them enough. These are mechanical interventions that trigger involuntary nervous system responses every single time you use them correctly. The 4-7-8 breathing protocol stands as the most powerful of these interventions. When you inhale for exactly 4 counts, hold for 7 counts, and exhale for 8 counts, you activate your vagus nerve, a critical component of your parasympathetic nervous system that acts like a manual override switch for stress responses. The specific timing matters. 4 counts of inhalation fills your lungs to approximately 85% capacity, creating optimal oxygen saturation without triggering the gasp reflex. 7 counts of holding allows carbon dioxide levels to rise just enough to stimulate vasodilation, increasing blood flow to your prefrontal cortex. 8 counts of exhalation ensures complete activation of the parasympathetic response, essentially forcing your body to downshift from emergency mode to strategic mode. Negotiators practice this breathing pattern constantly, not just during crises. They use it before entering high-stakes situations, during intense conversations, and immediately after confrontations to prevent stress hormones from lingering in their system. The key is maintaining precise timing regardless of what's happening around you. Your brain might scream for faster breathing when adrenaline surges, but maintaining the 4-7-8 pattern sends an override signal that says, there is no emergency, even when everything else in your body disagrees. The counting itself serves a dual purpose. Beyond controlling breath timing, it occupies your conscious mind with a simple mathematical task, preventing it from generating catastrophic thoughts that would amplify your stress response. You can't simultaneously count to 8 and construct elaborate worst-case scenarios. This cognitive occupation breaks the feedback loop between anxious thoughts and physical stress responses. Peripheral vision expansion offers another immediate intervention that most people never discover. When you're stressed, your vision literally narrows, a phenomenon called attentional tunneling that helped our ancestors focus on immediate threats, but sabotages modern problem solving. Crisis negotiators consciously reverse this narrowing by softening their gaze and deliberately noticing objects in their peripheral vision while maintaining focus on the person or situation in front of them. Try this right now. Look straight ahead at these words while simultaneously becoming aware of objects to your left and right without moving your eyes. Notice the walls, the furniture, the light patterns at the edges of your vision. This simple shift sends a powerful signal to your nervous system. I have enough resources to monitor my entire environment. Therefore, there is no immediate danger. Your nervous system responds by downregulating stress hormones within 10 to 15 seconds. The cold water nerve hack exploits your mammalian dive reflex, an evolutionary response that instantly calms your nervous system when cold water contacts specific facial nerves. Negotiators who can't leave their position splash cold water on their faces during bathroom breaks. But the most effective application involves holding cold water in your mouth for 30 seconds without swallowing. The temperature receptors on your soft palate trigger an immediate parasympathetic response, dropping your heart rate by 10-25% and clearing stress hormones from your bloodstream. Some negotiators keep ice water nearby during extended operations, taking small sips and holding the water against the roof of their mouth when they feel their control beginning to slip. The effect is so powerful that many emergency departments now use cold water facial immersion to stop panic attacks. It works faster and more reliably than most pharmaceutical interventions. The float, don't fight method revolutionizes how you experience intense emotions without being controlled by them. Most people instinctively resist uncomfortable emotions, creating internal tension that amplifies distress. Negotiators learn to do the opposite, to consciously relax their muscles while experiencing strong emotions, letting feelings flow through their body without resistance. Physical tension and emotional intensity are so deeply linked that you literally cannot maintain peak emotional arousal while your muscles are relaxed. When anger rises, negotiators systematically release muscle tension, starting with their shoulders, then jaw, then hands. They don't try to stop feeling angry. They simply refuse to hold that anger in their muscles. The emotion continues but loses its power to control behavior. This technique requires practicing progressive muscle relaxation until you can release tension from any muscle group within 2 seconds of conscious attention. Start by tensing your shoulders as hard as possible for 5 seconds, then releasing completely. Notice the contrast. Now practice achieving that same level of relaxation without the initial tensing. Move through your entire body, face, neck, arms, chest, abdomen, legs until you can instantly release tension from any area. During actual confrontations, negotiators perform rapid tension scans every 30 to 60 seconds, identifying and releasing muscle tension before it accumulates. They might be listening to someone scream threats while consciously relaxing their facial muscles, softening their hands, and releasing their shoulders. The cognitive dissonance between relaxed muscles and intense situations forces the nervous system to recalibrate, usually choosing the calmer state indicated by muscle relaxation. The temperature regulation protocol uses strategic body cooling to prevent emotional overheating. When your core body temperature rises even half a degree, your irritability increases measurably. Stress raises body temperature, creating a feedback loop where physical heat amplifies emotional heat. Negotiators combat this by loosening clothing around their neck and wrists areas where blood vessels are close to the skin surface, allowing heat to dissipate more efficiently. Rolling up sleeves isn't just about appearing casual. Exposed forearms release significant body heat, helping maintain the thermal conditions necessary for emotional control. Some negotiators place cool, damp cloths on their wrists during breaks, dropping their core temperature enough to extend their emotional endurance by hours. The bilateral stimulation technique borrowed from trauma therapy provides instant emotional regulation through alternating left-right sensory input. Negotiators tap their thighs alternately left, right in a steady rhythm while maintaining conversation. This bilateral stimulation activates both brain hemispheres simultaneously, preventing the emotional dominance that occurs when one hemisphere becomes overactive during stress. The tapping must be subtle enough to avoid detection, but firm enough to register sensory input. The rhythm should match a calm heartbeat, approximately 60 beats per minute. This creates a somatic pacemaker that your actual heart rate tends to match, physically forcing your body toward a calmer state regardless of external circumstances. Micro-movement protocols prevent the physical stagnation that amplifies emotional intensity. When you remain perfectly still during stress, tension accumulates like water behind a dam. Negotiators use imperceptible movements, wiggling toes inside their shoes, slightly shifting weight between feet, making tiny circles with their ankles to keep energy flowing without appearing agitated. These movements must be invisible to observers, but constant enough to prevent energy stagnation. The goal isn't to fidget, but to maintain subtle physical flow that prevents stress from crystallizing in your body. Think of it as keeping your nervous system in neutral, rather than park ready to respond, but not locked into any particular state. The grounding sequence brings you fully into your physical body when emotions threaten to overwhelm. Negotiators practice what they call 5-4-3-2-1, identifying 5 things they can see, 4 things they can touch, 3 things they can hear, 2 things they can smell, and 1 thing they can taste. This sensory inventory forces your consciousness fully into the present moment, interrupting the time-traveling tendency of anxiety future focus and anger past focus. Speed matters with this technique. The entire sequence should take no more than 30 seconds, requiring rapid sensory scanning that leaves no room for emotional elaboration. You're not contemplating each sensation, but simply noting and moving on, creating a rapid-fire reality check that anchors you in what is rather than what if. The cardiac coherence protocol synchronizes your heart rate variability with your breathing to create optimal emotional regulation conditions. Inhale for 5 seconds. Exhale for 5 seconds, maintaining this pattern for at least 2 minutes. This specific timing creates resonance between your cardiovascular and respiratory systems, producing a measurable state of physiological coherence that makes emotional dysregulation nearly impossible. Professional negotiators often maintain this breathing pattern for entire conversations, speaking during exhales and listening during inhales. With practice, this becomes so natural that others don't notice the pattern, but your nervous system remains in an optimally regulated state throughout the interaction. The pressure point reset uses specific acupressure points to interrupt stress responses. The most effective point sits in the fleshy area between your thumb and index finger. Squeeze this point firmly for 10 seconds on each hand when you feel emotional intensity rising. The pressure triggers nerve responses that interfere with stress signal transmission, creating a brief window of calm that allows other regulation techniques to take effect. Similarly, pressing your tongue firmly against the roof of your mouth, just behind your front teeth, activates nerve clusters that trigger parasympathetic responses. Negotiators often maintain this tongue position during difficult conversations, creating constant low-level parasympathetic activation that prevents stress from gaining momentum. The metabolic reset involves strategic use of glucose to maintain emotional stability. Your brain consumes enormous amounts of glucose during emotional regulation, up to 25% more than during calm states. When blood sugar drops, emotional control becomes nearly impossible. Negotiators maintain stable glucose levels through strategic consumption of complex carbohydrates before and during extended operations. A small amount of honey under the tongue provides rapid glucose without the spike and crash of refined sugar. The sublingual absorption bypasses digestion, delivering energy directly to your bloodstream within minutes. This isn't about eating for comfort, but about maintaining the metabolic conditions necessary for emotional override. Hydration plays an equally critical role. Even 2% dehydration significantly impairs emotional regulation. Your brain literally shrinks when dehydrated, pulling away from your skull and triggering pain receptors that amplify irritability. Negotiators drink room temperature water. Constantly cold water triggers mild stress responses, while warm water is absorbed more efficiently. The posture reset protocol uses specific body positions to trigger emotional states incompatible with dysregulation. Standing with feet shoulder width apart, shoulders back, and chin level triggers testosterone release and cortisol reduction within 2 minutes. This power posture isn't about dominance, but about accessing the biochemical state associated with calm confidence. Conversely, the neutral position, sitting with both feet flat on floor, hands resting openly on thighs, spine straight but not rigid, prevents both aggressive and defensive posturing that would amplify emotional intensity. Negotiators maintain these positions even when every instinct screams to lean forward aggressively or backward defensively. The eye movement protocol uses specific gaze patterns to prevent emotional escalation. Looking slightly above the eye line of an aggressive person prevents the primal dominance responses triggered by direct eye contact while avoiding the submission signals of looking down. This professional gaze focused on the point between and slightly above the eyebrows maintains engagement without triggering primitive threat responses in either party. Rapid eye movements between fixed points called saccades can interrupt building emotional intensity. Negotiators might quickly glance at 3 points in the room: clock, door, window, then return to professional gaze. These micro breaks prevent the locked-in staring that amplifies confrontation, while appearing like natural environmental awareness. The vocal calibration technique uses your own voice as a regulation tool. Speaking slightly slower and at a lower pitch than normal triggers parasympathetic responses in your own nervous system. The vibrations from low-frequency speech stimulate the vagus nerve, creating a calming feedback loop. Negotiators practice dropping their voice half an octave when they feel tension rising, using their own speech as a continuous regulation tool. Mastering these physical interventions requires daily practice in non-crisis situations. Use traffic delays to practice 4-7-8 breathing. Expand peripheral vision during boring meetings. Apply the float, don't fight method to minor irritations. Each repetition strengthens the neural pathways that make these interventions automatic when you need them most. The transformation happens gradually, then suddenly. You'll notice yourself catching stress responses earlier, interrupting them more easily, recovering faster when you do lose control. Within weeks, situations that once triggered immediate emotional flooding become manageable challenges. Within months, you'll maintain calm in circumstances that would have previously overwhelmed you completely. Physical mastery of your nervous system provides the foundation for everything else in the emotional override system. Without it, cognitive techniques remain theoretical. With it, you possess the biological platform necessary for unshakable emotional control. Your body becomes your ally rather than your enemy, supporting rather than sabotaging your intention to remain calm regardless of external chaos. Chapter 3. The 10-second mental firewall. Between the moment someone insults you and your response lies a gap, sometimes microseconds, sometimes longer, where everything gets decided. Most people never notice this gap. They experience provocation and reaction as a single, seamless event. But crisis negotiators have learned to stretch this gap into a controllable space where they choose their response rather than having it chosen for them. They call this the mental firewall, and installing it changes everything about how you handle emotional pressure. The third-person shift represents the most powerful cognitive interruption pattern ever developed for emotional control. When tension rises, you mentally float outside your body and observe yourself from across the room. You see yourself sitting there, feeling angry or frustrated, but you're watching it happen rather than being consumed by it. This isn't dissociation or denial, you're fully present and aware. You're simply changing your observation point to gain massive psychological leverage. Watch yourself right now reading these words. See yourself from above, holding this book or looking at this screen. Notice your posture, your breathing, your facial expression. That observer position, that's where negotiators live during high-stakes conversations. They're simultaneously participating and watching themselves participate, maintaining dual awareness that prevents complete emotional immersion. The shift happens through specific mental commands. When you feel emotional intensity building, you tell yourself, "I'm watching John feel angry right now," using your own name. "I can see Sarah getting frustrated again," using your own name. This grammatical shift from I to your name creates immediate psychological distance. You can't be fully consumed by an emotion you're observing yourself experience. Negotiators practice this shift hundreds of times daily with minor emotions. Stuck in traffic. "I'm watching Mike feel impatient." Dealing with a difficult email. "I can see Jessica getting annoyed." Each repetition strengthens the neural pathway that makes third-person observation automatic during genuine crises. The counting variance technique gives your rational mind something to do while your emotional brain rages. But this isn't simple counting from 1 to 10. Negotiators use complex counting patterns that require just enough concentration to prevent emotional thoughts from taking hold. Count backward from 100 by 7s 100, 93, 86, 79, 72. The mathematical effort required blocks emotional processing without being so difficult that you lose track of the conversation. Some negotiators count in foreign languages they're learning, adding translation complexity that further occupies cognitive resources. Others visualize numbers as physical objects, seeing each number as a different color or shape, adding visual processing to mathematical processing. The more cognitive channels you occupy with counting, the fewer remain available for emotional escalation. The rhythm of counting matters as much as the numbers themselves. Slow, steady counting at one number per second creates a temporal framework, that prevents the rapid-fire thinking patterns associated with anger and anxiety. Your thoughts can only move as fast as your counting rhythm allows, artificially governing the speed of your mental processing. Phrase anchors work like emergency exits in your mind, predetermined verbal patterns you can activate instantly when emotions threaten to overwhelm. These aren't affirmations or mantras, but specific cognitive interruption commands that break emotional momentum. Negotiators develop personal phrase anchors that resonate with their individual psychology, but certain patterns prove universally effective. Interesting data point becomes a powerful anchor when someone attacks or insults you. Instead of processing the attack emotionally, you label it as data. That harsh criticism. Interesting data point about their emotional state. That personal insult. Interesting data point about their strategy. This phrase instantly shifts you from emotional reaction to analytical observation. What would excellence do here? Forces you to consider optimal responses rather than impulsive ones. The question presupposes that excellence is possible, that there's a best-case way to handle this situation, and that you're capable of finding it. Negotiators ask themselves this question dozens of times during difficult conversations, constantly recalibrating toward optimal rather than emotional responses. This is temporary, breaks the permanence illusion that makes emotional situations feel overwhelming. Whatever you're experiencing will end. The meeting will conclude. The confrontation will finish. The crisis will resolve. This phrase anchor reminds your nervous system that survival is guaranteed, reducing the biological urgency that drives emotional reactions. Sensory switches involve deliberately changing sensory channels to interrupt emotional processing. When you're locked in verbal conflict, suddenly shifting attention to physical sensation breaks the pattern. Negotiators might press their feet firmly into the floor, feeling every point of contact between shoe and ground. This unexpected sensory redirect forces the brain to abandon emotional processing temporarily to handle the new sensory data. The texture scan involves running your fingers along different surfaces, the rough fabric of your pants, the smooth surface of a table, the ridged edge of a pen. Each texture change requires cognitive processing that competes with emotional processing for neural resources. Negotiators often keep objects with distinct textures within reach: a smooth stone, a textured stress ball, a piece of fabric to enable quick sensory switches when needed. Temperature sensing provides another sensory interrupt. Focus intensely on the temperature of the air on your face, the warmth of your hands, the coolness of the chair against your back. Temperature perception requires different neural pathways than emotional processing, creating cognitive competition that weakens emotional intensity. The mental firewall strengthens through a practice negotiators call cognitive loading, deliberately overwhelming your mental capacity during calm moments so you can function under cognitive strain during crises. Read a complex article while listening to music with lyrics in a different language. Solve math problems while someone talks to you about their day. Play chess while carrying on an unrelated conversation. These exercises stretch your ability to maintain multiple cognitive processes simultaneously, preparing you for the dual awareness required during emotional situations. Time distortion techniques alter your perception of temporal flow to prevent emotional urgency. Negotiators learn to mentally slow down time during confrontations, experiencing each second as longer than normal. This perceptual shift happens through conscious attention to micro moments: the pause between words, the space between breaths, the tiny movements of facial muscles. When you notice these usually invisible moments, time seems to expand, giving you more space to choose responses. The future self perspective involves consulting an imagined version of yourself from 5 years in the future. This future self has already survived whatever you're currently experiencing and can offer perspective on its actual importance. Will this matter in 5 years? Will you even recall this specific conversation? The future self usually counsels calm, knowing that today's crisis becomes tomorrow's forgotten irritation. Negotiators develop detailed mental images of their future selves older, wiser, more experienced, and consult them during difficult moments. What would future you advise? How would they handle this situation? This temporal shift creates psychological distance similar to the third-person shift, but adds the wisdom of imagined experience. The probability calculation involves rapidly assessing actual versus perceived threats. When someone yells at you, your emotional brain registers existential danger. But your rational brain can calculate actual probabilities. What's the chance this person will physically harm me? Near zero. What's the chance this will matter next week? Minimal. What's the chance I'll suffer lasting damage from this interaction? Virtually none. Negotiators run these calculations constantly, using specific percentage estimates rather than vague assessments. There's a 2% chance this person's opinion will affect my life. There's a 95% chance I'll forget this conversation within a month. These numerical estimates engage mathematical processing regions that compete with emotional processing regions for dominance. Mental compartmentalization creates separate psychological spaces for different aspects of your life, preventing emotional contamination between areas. Work stress stays in the work compartment. Personal issues remain in the personal compartment. The current confrontation gets its own temporary compartment that you'll delete when it's over. Picture these compartments as physical rooms in your mind. When dealing with a difficult situation, you enter that room, handle what needs handling, then exit and lock the door behind you. The emotion stays in that room rather than following you everywhere. Negotiators visualize themselves literally closing doors on completed interactions, preventing emotional residue from accumulating. The refrain cascade involves rapidly generating multiple interpretations of the same event to prevent emotional lock-in on a single narrative. Someone cuts you off in traffic. First interpretation: they're an inconsiderate jerk. Second interpretation: they might be rushing to the hospital. Third interpretation: they didn't see you. Fourth interpretation: they're having the worst day of their life. Fifth interpretation: this is an opportunity to practice emotional control. Each reframe weakens the emotional charge of the original interpretation. By the time you've generated 5 different explanations, no single narrative holds enough power to trigger strong emotional response. Negotiators practice generating at least 3 reframes for every potentially triggering event, preventing their minds from settling on the most inflammatory interpretation. The pause protocol inserts deliberate delays between stimulus and response, even when delays feel impossible. Before answering a provocative question, negotiators might adjust their posture, take a sip of water, or clear their throat, buying precious seconds for their rational mind to engage. These micro-pauses appear natural, but serve as circuit breakers that prevent emotional reactions from bypassing cognitive evaluation. Some negotiators use the echo pause, repeating the last few words someone said before responding. So you're saying I'm completely incompetent? This echo serves multiple purposes. It confirms understanding, provides processing time, and often causes the speaker to reconsider their statement when they hear it repeated back. The cognitive override sequence combines multiple interruption patterns into a rapid-fire protocol that breaks even intense emotional states. Count backward from 20 by 3s while visualizing each number in a different color, while pressing your feet into the floor, while asking yourself what excellence would do here. The combined cognitive load makes emotional intensity impossible to maintain. Negotiators memorize personal override sequences that they can activate instantly, practicing them so frequently that execution becomes automatic. The entire sequence should take no more than 10 seconds, hence the 10-second mental firewall. But those 10 seconds create enough cognitive interruption to prevent emotional hijacking. The pattern interrupt involves doing something slightly unexpected that breaks the emotional momentum of an interaction. If voices are rising, suddenly speak more softly. If someone leans forward aggressively, lean slightly to the side. If the conversation is accelerating, deliberately slow your speech. These subtle pattern breaks force all participants to recalibrate. creating momentary confusion that disrupts emotional escalation. Mental rehearsal prepares your cognitive interruption patterns through visualization during calm moments. Negotiators spend time each day imagining difficult scenarios and mentally practicing their firewall techniques. They visualize themselves being insulted, threatened, or challenged, then see themselves successfully implementing their interruption patterns and maintaining control. This mental practice creates what neuroscientists call prospective memory, preloaded responses that activate automatically when specific conditions arise. Your brain treats visualized practice similarly to real experience, strengthening the neural pathways that will fire during actual confrontations. The attention spotlight technique involves consciously controlling what receives your mental focus. During emotional situations, your attention naturally narrows onto the source of distress. Negotiators learn to deliberately widen or shift this spotlight, choosing what deserves attention and what doesn't. That hostile tone. Not worth spotlight time. The actual information being communicated. Worth full attention. Practice controlling your attention spotlight by consciously choosing focus targets throughout your day. Focus on the sensation of walking while ignoring surrounding conversations. Focus on someone's words while ignoring their tone. Focus on solutions while refusing to spotlight problems. Each practice repetition increases your ability to consciously direct attention away from emotional triggers. The labeling technique involves naming emotions as they arise without judging or resisting them. Anger is here. Frustration is present. Fear is visiting. This simple acknowledgement strips emotions of their mysterious power. Once named, emotions become manageable experiences rather than overwhelming forces. Negotiators use specific, clinical language when labeling emotions. Not, "I'm furious," but "elevated anger is present." Not, "I'm terrified," but "fear response activated." This clinical distance prevents emotional identification while still acknowledging the experience. The metacognition protocol involves thinking about your thinking, observing your thoughts as they occur rather than being swept along by them. Watch your mind generate thoughts like, "This person is an idiot," or "I can't handle this." Observe these thoughts arising and passing without believing or acting on them. Thoughts are just mental events, not commands or truths. Negotiators develop the ability to narrate their own mental processes. Now my mind is generating defensive thoughts. Now it's creating catastrophic scenarios. Now it's searching for counterattacks. This running commentary maintains observer consciousness even during intense emotional states. Cognitive flexibility training involves regularly practicing mental shifts between different types of thinking. Solve a logic puzzle, then immediately write poetry. Calculate mathematics, then describe emotions. Analyze data, then create fiction. These rapid shifts between cognitive modes increase your ability to consciously choose which mental resources to activate during confrontations. The mental firewall becomes stronger with each successful implementation. Every time you interrupt an emotional reaction, the neural pathway strengthens. Every time you maintain observer consciousness during conflict, it becomes easier to achieve. Every time you choose response over reaction, you're rewiring your brain's default patterns. The transformation from reactive to responsive doesn't require years of meditation or therapy. It requires consistent application of cognitive interruption patterns until they become your new normal. The 10-second mental firewall gives you enough time to engage your prefrontal cortex, access your training, and choose excellence over impulse. That's all the time you need to maintain control when everyone else loses theirs. Chapter 4. Emotional Mathematics. Numbers don't lie, and neither does your nervous system when you track its patterns with mathematical precision. Crisis negotiators discovered that emotions follow predictable equations rising and falling according to specific variables you can measure, calculate, and adjust. They treat emotional states like engineers treat system loads, using hard data instead of vague feelings to make critical decisions about when to engage, when to withdraw, and when to push forward. The numerical scale from 1 to 10 becomes your primary measurement tool. But this isn't the simplistic, rate your anger approach you might have encountered before. Negotiators use granular decimal points distinguishing between a 6.3 and a 6.7 level of frustration, because those small differences determine entirely different response strategies. A 6.3 means you can still access complex reasoning. A 6.7 means you're approaching the threshold where cognitive function begins degrading rapidly. Your baseline number represents your emotional state during complete calm, usually between 2.0 and 3.0 for most people. Nobody stays at 0. That would indicate unconsciousness. Even during deep relaxation, your emotional system maintains low-level activation. Knowing your personal baseline matters because all other measurements are relative to this starting point. Take your emotional temperature right now. Not how you think you feel, but the actual physiological markers. Heart rate, muscle tension, thought speed, breathing depth. Assign a number. If you're reading calmly, you're probably between 2.5 and 3.5. If you're reading while stressed about something else, you might be at 4.0 or 5.0. This number is your current operating level. The threshold zones define where different capabilities go offline. At 5.5, creative problem solving starts declining. At 6.5, empathy becomes difficult. At 7.0, complex reasoning fails. At 8.0, you lose access to trained skills and revert to primitive responses. At 9.0, you're in full fight or flight with minimal cognitive control. At 10.0, you're completely dysregulated and unable to function strategically. Negotiators check their number every 3 to 5 minutes during operations, sometimes more frequently during intense periods. They'll be mid-conversation while internally noting, currently at 5.2, trending upward, approaching first threshold. This constant monitoring prevents surprise dysregulation. You can't be ambushed by emotions you're actively tracking. The rate of change matters as much as the absolute number. Jumping from 3.0 to 6.0 in 30 seconds affects you differently than gradually climbing to 6.0 over an hour. Rapid escalation triggers emergency responses that make recovery harder. Gradual escalation allows for continuous adjustment and intervention. Negotiators calculate their emotional velocity, how fast their number changes per minute. A velocity of plus 0.5 per minute is manageable. You're getting more activated, but have time to intervene. A velocity of plus 1.0 per minute requires immediate intervention. A velocity of plus 2.0 per minute means you're seconds away from losing control. Tracking velocity lets you predict where you'll be emotionally in the next few minutes and take preventive action. The decay rate describes how quickly you return to baseline after activation. Some people drop from 7.0 to 3.0 in 5 minutes. Others take an hour to make the same descent. Your personal decay rate determines how long you need between difficult conversations, how much recovery time to schedule, and when you're ready to re-engage after conflict. Measure your decay rate by tracking how long it takes to drop 1 full point after a moderate stressor. If it takes you 10 minutes to go from 6.0 to 5.0, your decay rate is 0.1 per minute. This number typically improves with practice-trained negotiators, often achieve decay rates of 0.3 or higher, returning to baseline 3 times faster than untrained individuals. The accumulation effect explains why multiple small stressors can be more dangerous than single large ones. Each stressor adds to your number, but if they arrive faster than your decay rate can handle, you experience emotional accumulation. 5 different 1-point stressors in rapid succession might push you from 3.0 to 8.0, even though each individual stressor seemed minor. Negotiators track their emotional load, the sum of all active stressors at any moment. Work conflict plus 2.0, financial worry plus 1.5, relationship tension plus 1.0, physical fatigue plus 0.5 creates a total load of plus 5.0. 0 added to your baseline. Starting a difficult conversation with a 5.0 load means you're beginning at 7.0 or 8.0 instead of 3.0, leaving almost no margin for additional stress. The multiplication factors identify conditions that amplify emotional reactions. Hunger multiplies emotional intensity by 1.3. Sleep deprivation multiplies by 1.5. Dehydration multiplies by 1.2. Caffeine excess multiplies by 1.4. These factors stack if you're hungry 1.3 and sleep-deprived 1.5. Your emotional reactions are magnified by 1.95, nearly doubling their intensity. Physical pain serves as a particularly powerful multiplier, ranging from 1.2 for minor discomfort to 2.5 for severe pain. Negotiators with injuries or chronic conditions must adjust their calculations accordingly. A conversation that would normally push you to 5.0 might hit 7.5 when you're dealing with back pain, critical information for deciding whether to engage or postpone. The cognitive cost calculation reveals how much mental energy different emotional states consume. Maintaining control at 4.0 requires minimal effort. Maintaining control at 6.0 demands moderate cognitive resources. Maintaining control at 8.0 exhausts your mental reserves within minutes. Negotiators budget their cognitive resources like financial assets, spending them strategically rather than wastefully. Every point above your baseline costs exponentially more energy to maintain control. Operating at 5.0 might consume 20% of your cognitive resources. Operating at 6.0 consumes 40%. Operating at 7.0 consumes 70%. Operating at 8.0 consumes 95%, leaving almost nothing for actual problem solving. This explains why arguments become circular and unproductive once both parties exceed 7.0. Neither has cognitive resources left for creative solutions. The recovery investment calculation determines whether engaging is worth the aftermath. If a conversation will push you to 8.0 and your decay rate is 0.1 per minute, you'll need 50 minutes to return to baseline. Is the conversation worth 50 minutes of recovery time? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Making this calculation before engaging prevents emotional overspending. Negotiators often use emotional budgets for extended operations. If they have 8 hours of negotiation ahead and know they'll need to be functional at the end, they might budget. I can afford 3 excursions to 7.0, or 1 to 8.0, or 6 to 6.0, while maintaining effectiveness. They then track their spending throughout the day, adjusting tactics to stay within budget. The compound interest effect describes how successful emotional regulation pays dividends over time. Each time you successfully maintain control below 7.0, your threshold rises slightly. Your 7.0 threshold might become 7.2, then 7.5, then 8.0. Negotiators who've practiced for years can maintain cognitive function up to 8.5, or even 9.0 levels that would completely dysregulate most people. The pattern recognition matrices track which specific triggers cause which numerical changes. Condescending tone, +1. 5 points. Being interrupted, +1. 0 points. Personal attacks, +2. 0 points. Threats, +2. 5 points. Building your personal matrix reveals your emotional mathematics, allowing precise prediction and preparation. Some triggers cause non-linear responses. Maybe dismissive attitudes normally add 1.0, but when combined with eye-rolling, they suddenly add 3.0. These combination triggers, what negotiators call synergistic stressors, require special attention because they can cause unexpected spikes that bypass normal controls. The intervention efficiency rating measures how much each regulation technique reduces your number. Deep breathing might provide -0.5 per minute. The cold water technique might give an immediate -2.0. Progressive muscle relaxation might deliver -0.3 per minute. Knowing these values lets you choose interventions based on how much reduction you need and how quickly you need it. Different techniques work better at different levels. Breathing exercises are highly effective between 4.0 and 6.0, but less useful above 7.0. Cold water works at any level, but provides only temporary relief. Physical movement is powerful between 6.0 and 8.0, but might escalate things above 8.0. Your intervention menu should include options optimized for every level. The emotional momentum calculation predicts future states based on current trends. If you're at 5.0 with a velocity of plus 0.3 per minute, and the conversation will last 20 more minutes, you'll reach 11.0 without intervention, an impossible number that indicates complete dysregulation. This projection triggers immediate intervention to change the trajectory. Negotiators use simple formulas. Current level plus velocity time equals sign projected level. If the projected level exceeds 7.0, they intervene immediately. If it exceeds 8.0, they might request a break. If it exceeds 9.0, they might end the conversation rather than risk complete dysregulation. The resistance coefficient measures how effectively you can slow emotional escalation. A resistance coefficient of 0.5 means you can cut the natural escalation rate in half through conscious effort. A coefficient of 0.8 means you can reduce it by 80%. Elite negotiators achieve coefficients above 0.9, almost completely halting emotional escalation through trained resistance. Building resistance requires practicing under controlled stress. Expose yourself to measured stressors while maintaining specific numerical targets. Watch an annoying video while keeping yourself below 4.0. Have a disagreement while staying under 5.0. Handle criticism while remaining below 6.0. Each successful resistance builds your coefficient higher. The equilibrium point identifies where your activation level stabilizes during sustained stress. Some people plateau at 6.0, they get activated to that level and naturally maintain it. Others plateau at 7.5 or 8.0. Knowing your equilibrium point reveals your natural emotional ceiling during extended challenges. Negotiators work to lower their equilibrium points through targeted practice. The signal-to-noise ratio compares useful emotional information to emotional static. At 3.0, emotions provide clear signals about your environment and needs. At 5.0, signal and noise are roughly equal. At 7.0, noise overwhelms signal. Above 8.0, you're receiving pure emotional noise with no useful information. Negotiators maintain the lowest level that still provides necessary emotional data without overwhelming static. The refractory period describes how long you remain sensitized after emotional activation. After reaching 8.0, you might return to 3.0, but remain hypersensitive for an hour. A 4.0 trigger might spike you to 7.0 instead of 5.0. This refractory vulnerability requires adjusted calculations. Negotiators add a sensitivity multiplier of 1.5 to all calculations during refractory periods. Temperature tracking uses micro-measurements throughout conversations. Every 30 seconds, note your number mentally. 4.2, 4.5, 4.8, 5.1. This granular tracking reveals acceleration patterns before they become problematic. You might notice you always accelerate during specific topics or with certain conversation patterns, allowing strategic preparation. The mathematical approach removes moral judgment from emotional states. Being at 7.0 isn't bad or a failure. It's simply data indicating you need intervention. This clinical perspective prevents the secondary emotional reactions that come from judging yourself for having emotions. The shame of losing control often causes more dysregulation than the original trigger. The cost-benefit analysis applies to every emotional investment. Will expressing anger here provide benefits worth the cognitive cost? Will maintaining perfect calm yield returns justifying the energy expenditure? Sometimes strategic emotional expression, consciously choosing to operate at 6.0, achieves better outcomes than forced calm. The key is making these choices mathematically rather than impulsively. Negotiators develop personal equations that predict their emotional responses with startling accuracy. If X happens when I'm above 4.0, I'll reach 7.0 within 2 minutes, unless I intervene with Y technique. These equations become so refined that they can predict their emotional states hours in advance, based on scheduled events and current conditions. The mathematical model transforms emotional regulation from mysterious art to practical science. You stop hoping you'll stay calm and start calculating exactly what's required to maintain control. You stop wondering why you lost it and start identifying the specific numerical conditions that led to dysregulation. You stop feeling victimized by emotions and start managing them like any other measurable system. Each calculation strengthens your executive function, the brain CEO that makes strategic decisions. The more you practice emotional mathematics, the stronger this function becomes. Eventually, the calculations happen automatically, running in the background while you focus on the conversation itself. Your unconscious mind handles the math while your conscious mind handles the interaction. The precision of emotional mathematics gives you massive tactical advantage. While others operate on vague feelings and hope, you're working with specific numbers and proven formulas. You know exactly where you are, where you're going, and what's required to get where you want to be. This certainty alone reduces emotional intensity. Uncertainty amplifies stress, while clarity diminishes it. Chapter 5. The Hostage Negotiator's Voice. Sound waves carry more than words. They transmit emotional states directly into the nervous systems of everyone within hearing range. Crisis negotiators discovered that specific vocal frequencies, rhythms, and patterns can override the emotional states of agitated individuals, essentially forcing calm through auditory channels alone. Your voice becomes a precision instrument capable of regulating not just your own emotional state, but the emotional climate of entire rooms. The fundamental frequency of your voice, its baseline pitch, acts as an emotional tuning fork that others unconsciously match. When you speak at 85 to 100 Hz typical male, or 165 to 195 Hz typical female, you're operating in what negotiators call the authority band, frequencies that trigger instinctive attention and compliance responses inherited from our evolutionary past. These frequencies penetrate emotional noise more effectively than higher or lower pitches. Dropping your voice by just 20 Hz from your normal speaking pitch creates immediate parasympathetic activation in your own nervous system. The physical act of producing lower frequencies requires deeper breathing, relaxed throat muscles, and slower exhalation, all of which trigger calming responses that cascade through your entire body. You literally cannot maintain high vocal pitch and deep calm simultaneously. The physics of sound production won't allow it. The resonance chambers in your chest, throat, and sinuses amplify certain frequencies while dampening others. Negotiators learn to speak from their chest cavity rather than their throat, creating a fuller, rounder tone that conveys stability. Place your hand on your chest while speaking. You should feel vibration. If you only feel vibration in your throat, your voice is too high and thin to project calm authority. Practice finding your optimal frequency by humming at different pitches while monitoring your emotional state. Start high and gradually descend until you find the pitch where your shoulders automatically drop, your breathing deepens, and your mind clears. This is your regulatory frequency, the exact pitch that maximizes your parasympathetic response. Most people find it approximately 25% lower than their habitual speaking voice. The speed of speech measured in words per minute directly influences cognitive processing in both speaker and listener. Normal conversation flows at 140–160 words per minute. Anxiety pushes this to 180–200. Anger can exceed 220. But when negotiators slow to 100–120 words per minute, something remarkable happens. The temporal spacing between words creates cognitive breathing room that prevents emotional overwhelm. Slow speech forces deeper breathing between phrases. You physically cannot speak continuously at 100 words per minute without pausing for breath every few seconds. These micro pauses allow your prefrontal cortex to catch up with your mouth, ensuring that words come from reasoning rather than reaction. The listener's brain similarly uses these gaps to process meaning, rather than just reacting to emotional tone. The tactical pause extends silence beyond comfort to create powerful psychological effects. After someone makes an aggressive statement, negotiators often wait 3 full seconds before responding. Not 3 quick beats, 3 long seconds where time seems to stretch. This pause serves multiple functions. It prevents reactive response. It forces the aggressor to hear their own words echoing in silence. And it demonstrates that you're not emotionally hijacked by their provocation. Counting these pauses becomes critical. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi might feel eternal during confrontation, but it's exactly the duration needed for stress hormones to begin declining in both parties. The discomfort you feel during these pauses is far less than the damage caused by immediate emotional reaction. Volume modulation works inversely to what instinct suggests. When others raise their voices, negotiators deliberately lower theirs. Not to a whisper. Whispering can seem condescending or weak, but to approximately 75% of normal volume. This forces listeners to lean in slightly, unconsciously shifting from aggressive to receptive posture. Their nervous system must calm slightly to hear you clearly, beginning a de-escalation cascade. The volume drop must be gradual to avoid seeming manipulative. Over the course of 3 or 4 sentences, allow your volume to decrease naturally. If someone is shouting, begin your response at normal volume, then progressively soften until they must quiet themselves to hear you. This technique, called volume gravity, pulls the entire conversation toward calmer levels. Tonal variance prevents the monotone delivery that signals emotional shutdown or disengagement. Even while maintaining low pitch and slow pace, negotiators modulate their tone to convey engagement without agitation. The melody of their speech rises and falls gently, like waves lapping shore rather than crashing against rocks. Practice reading neutral text, a news article or instruction manual, while deliberately varying your tone. Rise slightly on questions, fall on statements, pause before important points. Record yourself and listen for emotional undertones. The goal is warm variation without emotional spikes, interest without intensity. The articulation principle states that clarity of speech correlates with clarity of thought. When emotions rise, speech becomes slurred. Words run together, consonants soften. Negotiators maintain crisp articulation, even during stress, pronouncing each syllable distinctly. This mechanical precision requires frontal lobe activation that competes with emotional processing for neural resources. Focus on consonants, particularly the sharp edges of T's, the pop of P's, the buzz of Z's. These sounds require precise tongue and lip placement that's impossible when facial muscles are tensed with emotion. The physical act of creating clear consonants relaxes facial tension, which signals calm to your nervous system. Breath placement determines whether your voice conveys stability or stress. Speaking on the inhale creates a gasping quality that signals panic. Speaking while holding breath produces strained tones that communicate tension. Negotiators speak exclusively on the exhale, using the natural relaxation of exhalation to infuse their words with calm. The pattern follows this rhythm. Inhale through nose 2 seconds. Begin speaking on exhale 4-6 seconds. Pause at natural breath point. Repeat. This creates a hypnotic regularity that soothes both speaker and listener. Your words ride the wave of exhalation, carrying parasympathetic activation with them. Emotional contagion through voice occurs within 50 milliseconds faster than conscious thought. When you hear an angry voice, your larynx tightens before you consciously register the anger. When you hear a calm voice, your breathing deepens before you notice the calm. Negotiators use this automatic mimicry by maintaining vocal patterns that others must match to engage in conversation. The matching principle suggests that people unconsciously adjust their vocal patterns to align with conversational partners. If you consistently maintain low, slow, clear speech patterns, others gradually shift to match you. Within 2 to 3 minutes of conversation, the other person's voice often drops 10 to 15 hertz. Their pace slows by 20-30 words per minute, and their volume decreases by 10-20 decibels. Prosodic emphasis replaces volume for highlighting important points. Instead of getting louder to emphasize something which triggers alertness responses, negotiators stretch the important word slightly or pause immediately before it. This is significant carries more weight than this is significant, while maintaining calm in both parties. The pregnant pause before key words creates anticipation that ensures attention without triggering defense. What you're asking for is pause. Impossible lands with more impact than shouting the same words. The pause creates a void that the listener's mind rushes to fill, ensuring deeper processing of what follows. Vocal fry. The creaky, gravelly quality at the bottom of vocal range should be completely eliminated. While some people adopt vocal fry unconsciously, it signals uncertainty, disengagement, or manipulation. The irregular vibration pattern of vocal fry creates subtle anxiety in listeners, undermining any verbal message of calm or control. Rising inflection at sentence ends, called uptalk, similarly undermines authority and triggers uncertainty responses. Statements that sound like questions make listeners unconsciously question the speaker's confidence and competence. Negotiators train themselves to end statements with falling or flat inflection, conveying certainty even when discussing uncertainties. The echo technique involves subtly matching the vocal patterns of the other person before gradually leading them toward calmer patterns. If they're speaking at 180 words per minute, you might begin at 160, then slow to 140, then 120. They follow you down without realizing they're being led, like dancers unconsciously synchronizing to a gradually slowing beat. Harmonic resonance occurs when your vocal frequency creates sympathetic vibrations in the listener's body. Certain frequencies, particularly those around 110 Hz, create physical sensations of calm in most people. Ancient churches and temples were designed to amplify these frequencies, creating feelings of peace and transcendence through pure acoustic physics. The command voice differs from normal negotiation voice and is reserved for emergency interventions. It drops to the absolute bottom of vocal range, increases volume without increasing pitch, and eliminates all uncertainty markers. Stop. Now. Delivered in command voice triggers immediate compliance responses rooted in primitive neural pathways. Command voice requires practice to avoid sounding aggressive rather than authoritative. The tone must be firm, but not angry, direct, but not attacking. Think of how you would speak to stop a child from touching a hot stove, urgent and commanding, but coming from protection rather than anger. Silence becomes a vocal technique when deployed strategically. After making an important point, negotiators often stop speaking entirely for 5 to 10 seconds. This silence isn't empty, it's full of the weight of what was just said. It forces processing, prevents quick dismissal, and often prompts the other person to really consider rather than just respond. The recovery voice helps restore your own emotional equilibrium after intense exchanges. Speaking to yourself in low, slow, rhythmic patterns, even just reading something aloud, resets your vocal patterns, and by extension your emotional state. Negotiators often read procedural manuals or technical documents aloud after difficult conversations, using the mechanical act of controlled reading to restore baseline calm. Micro-affirmations embedded in speech create subtle positive reinforcement without seeming condescending. I hear what you're saying, delivered in warm, low tones, validates without agreeing. That's a perspective worth considering, acknowledges without endorsing. These phrases, delivered with specific vocal qualities, maintain connection while avoiding escalation. The phonetic components of words affect their emotional impact independent of meaning. Hard consonants K, T, P create microaggressive responses. Soft consonants M, N, L soothe. Long vowels UO, A calm. Short vowels I, E agitate. Negotiators consciously choose words with soothing phonetic profiles when tensions rise. I understand your position contains softer sounds than I get your point. Let's move forward soothes more than let's progress quickly. The meaning stays constant, but the acoustic impact changes dramatically. Building vocabulary with awareness of phonetic emotional impact provides subtle tools for managing conversational energy. Respiratory synchronization through vocal pacing creates unconscious bonding that reduces conflict intensity. When your speech rhythm matches natural breathing patterns, phrases that last one exhale, pauses that allow full inhales, listeners unconsciously sync their breathing to your speech. This respiratory alignment triggers mirror neuron responses that increase empathy and decrease antagonism. The vocal mask technique involves consciously projecting your voice from different facial areas to achieve different effects. Speaking from the nose area creates penetrating tones that cut through noise. Speaking from the lower face creates warmer, more intimate tones. Speaking from the whole face creates full, room-filling presence. Each mask serves different negotiation needs. Practice switching masks by placing your hand on different parts of your face while speaking the same sentence. Feel where the vibrations concentrate. With practice, you can shift vocal masks instantly based on situational needs: nasality for cutting through chaos, lower face for building connection, full face for projecting authority. Cadence patterns the rhythm and flow of speech, program listener expectations and responses. Predictable cadences da-dum like a heartbeat soothe. Irregular cadences create alertness. Negotiators use regular cadences during de-escalation and deliberately break pattern when they need to refocus wandering attention. The sub-harmonic register exists below your normal speaking voice and requires practice to access without strain. These ultra-low frequencies bypass cognitive processing and directly influence nervous system states. Speaking briefly in sub-harmonic range, just for key words or phrases, creates powerful unconscious responses that amplify your message beyond its verbal content. Vocal loading exercises prepare your voice for extended control under stress. Reading aloud for 20 minutes at precisely 100 words per minute. Maintaining exact pitch and volume builds the muscle memory and neural pathways needed for vocal control during actual confrontations. This practice might seem tedious, but it creates automatic vocal regulation that activates when you need it most. The acoustic environment affects how your voice is received and processed. Hard surfaces create echoes that amplify aggression. Soft surfaces absorb sound and promote calm. When possible, negotiators position themselves where their voice will be naturally softened by environmental acoustics, near curtains, upholstered furniture, or in corners where sound disperses rather than reflects. Your voice becomes a thermostat for emotional climate, constantly adjusting to maintain optimal temperature. Each vocal choice either heats or cools the conversation. Master negotiators make dozens of micro-adjustments per minute, raising and lowering emotional temperature through pure vocal technique, while their words remain neutral and professional. Vocal mastery transforms every conversation into an opportunity for emotional regulation, both yours and others. The techniques become so integrated that maintaining calm through voice becomes as natural as breathing. You speak calm into existence, one carefully crafted sound wave at a time, until your voice becomes the most powerful tool in your emotional override arsenal. Chapter 6. Pressure Inoculation Training. The human nervous system adapts to whatever you repeatedly expose it to, including extreme emotional pressure. Crisis negotiators don't hope they'll stay calm during life or death situations. They know they will, because they've systematically trained their nervous systems to function under conditions that would paralyze most people. They call this pressure inoculation, and it transforms emotional fragility into anti-fragility through controlled, progressive exposure to exactly the situations that once triggered loss of control. Stress stacking forms the foundation of pressure inoculation training. You deliberately layer multiple stressors to create compound pressure that exceeds what you'll face in real situations. The principle is simple. Train under conditions harder than reality, and reality becomes manageable. Negotiators might practice difficult conversations while physically exhausted, in uncomfortably hot rooms, with loud distractions, after consuming caffeine, while being recorded stacking pressures until maintaining calm requires every ounce of their training. Start with single stressor exposure. Choose something that reliably pushes your emotional activation to 5.0 or 6.0 on your numerical scale. For some people, this might be public speaking. For others, it might be confrontation, criticism, or being rushed. The specific stressor matters less than its reliability in creating moderate emotional activation. Exposure sessions should last exactly 15 minutes initially. This duration allows full activation without exhaustion. Set a timer. For those 15 minutes, you'll deliberately expose yourself to the stressor while practicing your override techniques. If public speaking is your training stressor, spend 15 minutes giving an impromptu presentation to yourself in the mirror, maintaining vocal control and physiological regulation throughout. The progression schedule follows a specific pattern. Week 1. Single stressor, 15 minutes daily. Week 2. Single stressor, 20 minutes daily. Week 3. Single stressor, 25 minutes daily. Week 4. Add a second stressor, return to 15 minutes. This wave pattern building duration, then adding complexity and dropping duration prevents overwhelm, while continuously expanding capacity. Physical stressors amplify emotional challenges without requiring other people or complex scenarios. Hold a plank position while having an imaginary argument with someone who frustrates you. Do wall sits while reciting critical feedback you've received. Hold ice cubes in both hands while practicing your response to insults. The physical discomfort creates genuine stress that your nervous system cannot distinguish from emotional stress, allowing solo training that builds real resilience. Cold exposure provides particularly powerful inoculation. Cold showers trigger the same fight or flight response as emotional confrontation. Start with 30 seconds of cold at the end of your normal shower. Focus on maintaining slow breathing and relaxed muscles despite the shock. Graduate to full cold showers, then ice baths if available. Negotiators who can maintain calm during prolonged cold exposure rarely lose control during verbal confrontation. The criticism protocol involves deliberately seeking negative feedback about things you care about. Post creative work online and read the harshest comments while maintaining emotional equilibrium. Ask trusted friends to critique your appearance, work, or personality while you practice staying at 4.0 or below. Submit proposals knowing they'll be rejected. Each exposure weakens the power of criticism to dysregulate you. Time pressure training compresses decision windows to create urgency stress. Give yourself 30 seconds to solve math problems. Write emails with 60-second timers. Make phone calls with strict 2-minute limits. The artificial urgency triggers the same stress response as real deadlines, but in controlled doses that build tolerance rather than trauma. Fatigue inoculation requires practicing emotional control when your resources are depleted. Wake up 2 hours early and practice confrontation scenarios while exhausted. Train at the end of long workdays when patience runs thin. Skip meals safely and occasionally, then expose yourself to frustrating situations. Your tired brain wants to react emotionally. Forcing it to respond strategically builds incredible resilience. The interruption protocol trains you to maintain composure when constantly disrupted. Set random timers while working on important tasks. When they sound, stop immediately and switch to something else. Have someone repeatedly interrupt you mid-sentence during practice conversations. Read complex material while someone asks you unrelated questions. Most emotional dysregulation happens when our flow is broken. Training with constant interruption builds immunity. Sensory overload training pushes your processing capacity to its limits. Practice emotional regulation while multiple TVs play different channels. Have difficult conversations in noisy restaurants. Work on complex problems while music blares. Your nervous system learns to maintain focus and calm despite overwhelming input, a skill that transfers directly to emotional overwhelm. The rejection gauntlet deliberately accumulates no responses to build tolerance. Ask for unreasonable discounts at stores. Request favors you know will be denied. Apply for positions you're unqualified for. Make social invitations likely to be declined. Each rejection is a small dose of emotional poison that builds immunity when taken regularly in controlled amounts. Performance pressure inoculation involves deliberately putting yourself in situations where others judge your competence. Take classes in subjects you're bad at. Join sports leagues where you're the weakest player. Attend meetings where you're the least knowledgeable person. Perform karaoke badly. The vulnerability of public incompetence triggers intense emotional responses that become manageable through repetition. The conflict escalation ladder progressively increases confrontation intensity. Start by disagreeing with strangers online about trivial topics. Progress to disagreeing with friends about moderate topics. Then disagree with authority figures about important topics. Each rung of the ladder pushes your comfort zone while building skills for the next level. Never skip rungs that leads to overwhelm rather than inoculation. Unpredictability training removes the comfort of preparation. Have someone surprise you with difficult conversations throughout the day. Use apps that randomly assign you uncomfortable tasks. Take unfamiliar routes to familiar places. Eat foods you dislike. Wear clothes that don't suit you. Constant low-level discomfort builds tolerance for unexpected emotional challenges. The embarrassment exposure systematically violates social norms in harmless ways. Wear mismatched shoes in public. Sing on public transportation. Ask absurd questions in serious settings. Lie down on the floor of a coffee shop for 30 seconds. Each deliberate embarrassment weakens the power of social judgment to control your emotional state. Boredom tolerance might seem unrelated to emotional control, but restlessness often triggers reactive behavior. Sit in an empty room for 30 minutes without any stimulation. Stand in lines without checking your phone. Listen to extremely boring podcasts without fast-forwarding. The agitation of boredom creates emotional pressure that builds tolerance when deliberately endured. The vulnerability protocol requires sharing progressively personal information. Tell acquaintances about minor failures. Share moderate insecurities with friends. Reveal significant fears to trusted people. Each disclosure triggers the emotional exposure that makes us reactive. But controlled, voluntary vulnerability builds strength, rather than creating weakness. Physical discomfort ladders use bodily sensations to trigger emotional responses. Hold uncomfortable positions for increasing durations. Wear slightly tight clothing for extended periods. Skip comfortable routines like morning coffee. Each discomfort creates irritability that you must consciously regulate, building the muscle memory of maintaining calm despite physical triggers. The social pressure chamber involves deliberately entering groups where you're the outsider. Attend religious services of unfamiliar faiths. Join hobby groups for activities you don't understand. Participate in political discussions with people whose views oppose yours. The pressure of not belonging triggers powerful emotional responses that become manageable through repeated exposure. Competition inoculation requires participating in contests you care about but will likely lose. Enter writing competitions, gaming tournaments, athletic events, or professional challenges where success is unlikely. The pressure of public competition combined with probable failure creates intense emotional activation that builds resilience through repetition. Information overload training involves processing multiple complex streams simultaneously. Watch educational videos while reading unrelated articles while listening to podcasts. Try to retain information from all three sources. The cognitive strain creates the same frustration as emotional overload, building capacity to maintain function when mentally overwhelmed. The deadline compression protocol progressively shortens time windows for task completion. If something normally takes an hour, do it in 45 minutes, then 30, then 20. The impossible deadline creates genuine pressure that triggers fight or flight responses you must override to function. This directly translates to maintaining calm when others create urgency pressure. Sleep deprivation inoculation done safely and occasionally exposes you to the emotional volatility of fatigue. Stay awake for 24 hours once per month, practicing emotional regulation throughout. Your exhausted brain desperately wants to react rather than respond. Forcing strategic thinking when depleted builds incredible strength for managing normal daily pressures. The mistake accumulation exercise involves deliberately making small errors and sitting with the discomfort. Send emails with typos. Give wrong answers in low-stakes situations. Arrive slightly late to casual meetings. Make minor social faux pas. The perfectionist anxiety triggered by intentional mistakes builds tolerance for the imperfection that makes us emotionally reactive. Authority challenge training progressively questions power structures. Start by politely disagreeing with retail policies. Progress to questioning organizational decisions. Eventually, respectfully challenge people with significant power over you. The fear of authority often drives emotional dysregulation. Systematic exposure builds comfort with hierarchical conflict. The pain tolerance ladder uses controlled physical discomfort to build emotional resilience. Hold stretches past comfort. Exercise to muscle failure. Take slightly too hot or cold showers. Each physical challenge that you consciously endure, rather than escape, builds the neural pathways of choosing response over reaction. Noise habituation involves working in progressively louder environments. Start with background music, progress to television, then multiple conversations, then construction noise. The irritation of unwanted sound creates emotional activation that you must regulate to maintain function. This builds immunity to one of the most common emotional triggers. The uncertainty protocol removes predictability from daily routines. Flip coins to make minor decisions. Let others choose your meals. Take whatever transportation arrives first. Accept random social invitations. The anxiety of not knowing creates emotional pressure that builds tolerance through repetition. Memory stress testing involves recalling information under pressure. Memorize complex data, then recall it while someone critiques your performance. Learn new skills while being watched and evaluated. The pressure of observed learning triggers the same emotional activation as real-world performance anxiety. Group disagreement training requires maintaining your position when everyone else opposes you. Join discussion groups and deliberately take unpopular positions. Remain calm and articulate when facing unanimous disagreement. The social pressure of isolation triggers powerful emotional responses that become manageable through practice. The accumulation protocol layers micro-stressors throughout entire days. Every hour, add one small stressor. Uncomfortable clothing, annoying music, delayed meals, difficult tasks, social challenges. By evening, you're managing 10 simultaneous stressors while maintaining emotional control. This mirrors real life where multiple small pressures combine to create dysregulation. Recovery intervals between training sessions matter as much as the training itself. After each inoculation session, spend equal time in active recovery. Gentle movement, calm breathing, positive activities. This teaches your nervous system that stress is temporary and recoverable, preventing the chronic activation that leads to burnout. The graduation test combines everything: multiple stressors, extended duration, real consequences. Negotiators might spend 8 hours in difficult negotiations while physically uncomfortable, sleep-deprived, and hungry. You might give an important presentation after an all-nighter, handle family conflict while sick, or manage work crises during personal troubles. These ultimate tests prove your inoculation training has transformed you from someone who hopes to stay calm into someone who knows they will. Each exposure makes you stronger. Each stressor you consciously endure, rather than avoid, builds resilience. Each time you maintain control under induced pressure, real pressure loses power over you. The situations that once triggered automatic dysregulation become minor challenges, easily managed with your trained override system. Pressure inoculation doesn't make you emotionless or indifferent. You still feel stress, discomfort, and pressure. The difference is that these feelings no longer control you. They become information rather than commands, experiences rather than emergencies. Through systematic exposure to everything that once overwhelmed you, you develop the rarest of capabilities: the ability to thrive under pressure that breaks most people. Chapter 7. The Strategic Disconnect. Professional detachment isn't about not caring, it's about caring so effectively that emotions inform, rather than infect, your decision-making. Crisis negotiators learn to separate their personal emotional investment from situational demands, creating a psychological buffer zone that preserves their functionality, even when dealing with heartbreaking scenarios. They witness human desperation, absorb verbal abuse, and navigate life or death stakes while maintaining the clinical distance necessary for strategic thinking. Observer mode represents the foundational skill of strategic disconnect. You split your consciousness into two distinct channels: the participant who engages with a situation and the observer who monitors without attachment. The participant feels everything: frustration when insulted, concern when threatened, sadness when witnessing pain. The observer notes these feelings without being controlled by them. Like a scientist documenting data during an experiment they're conducting on themselves. The observer exists outside the emotional weather system of the interaction. While the participant experiences the storm of conflict, the observer floats above it, watching patterns, noting triggers, identifying opportunities. This split consciousness state isn't dissociation or numbness, both parts remain fully present and aware. The difference lies in which part drives decision-making. Creating this observer requires specific mental architecture. Picture a control room with monitors showing different camera angles of the same scene. One monitor shows the first-person view, what you're seeing through your own eyes. Another shows a side angle where you can see yourself and the other person. A third shows an overhead view of the entire room. The observer sits in this control room, switching between views while the participant continues the interaction on the main floor. Practice establishing observer mode during routine conversations. While talking with someone about mundane topics, consciously split your awareness. Part of you maintains the conversation naturally, while another part watches you having the conversation. Notice your posture, your hand movements, your facial expressions. Listen to your voice as if it belongs to someone else. This dual awareness becomes easier with repetition until you can maintain it even during emotional intensity. The professional frame creates psychological boundaries that prevent personal contamination from professional challenges. Negotiators don't think, "This person is attacking me." They think, "This subject is exhibiting hostility toward the negotiator role." The hostility isn't personal, even when it includes personal insults. It's directed at a professional function you happen to be performing at this moment. Adopting professional frame requires conscious identity shifting. Before entering challenging situations, negotiators mentally put on their professional identity like a uniform. They're not John or Sarah anymore, they're the negotiator. This isn't avoiding responsibility or hiding behind a role. It's protecting the personal self while allowing the professional self to absorb impact without damage. The distinction becomes clearer through physical anchoring. Some negotiators literally change something about their appearance when shifting into professional mode, putting on specific glasses, wearing a particular watch, adjusting their posture in a specific way. This physical change signals the psychological shift from personal to professional, creating a tangible boundary between selves. Emotional firewalling prevents feelings from one situation from contaminating another. The anger from a morning argument doesn't influence afternoon negotiations. The sadness from one case doesn't affect performance on the next. Each situation exists in its own emotional container that cannot leak into others. This compartmentalization isn't suppression, the emotions exist and are processed appropriately, but they're contained within boundaries. Building firewalls requires conscious transition rituals between situations. Negotiators might wash their hands between difficult conversations, symbolically cleansing themselves of the previous interaction's emotional residue. They might do specific breathing exercises, physical movements, or visualization sequences that signal to their nervous system. That situation is complete. This is a new situation requiring fresh responses. The clinical perspective transforms emotional situations into intellectual puzzles. Instead of experiencing, "This person is being horrible," negotiators think, "Interesting behavioral pattern suggesting elevated stress response," probably indicating unmet needs around respect or control. Every emotional display becomes data to analyze rather than an attack to defend against. Developing clinical perspective requires learning to think in systems rather than stories. Stories have heroes and villains, right and wrong, emotional weight. Systems have inputs and outputs, feedback loops, predictable patterns. When someone yells at you, the story might be, "They're a jerk who's trying to humiliate me." The system view might be, elevated vocal amplitude indicating sympathetic nervous system activation, likely triggered by perceived threat to status, suggesting intervention through status restoration would de-escalate. The language you use internally shapes your emotional engagement. Clinical language creates distance, while emotional language creates immersion. Subject displaying anger response generates less personal activation than, "This person is furious with me." Observing defensive behavior pattern affects you less than, "They're attacking everything I say." Practice translating emotional language to clinical language in real time. When you catch yourself thinking emotional thoughts, immediately retranslate them. "I can't stand this person" becomes, "experiencing strong aversion response to subject's communication style." "This is hopeless" becomes, "current strategies showing limited effectiveness," suggesting need for tactical adjustment. Perspective shifting allows you to view situations from multiple vantage points simultaneously. Negotiators learn to see through their own eyes, the other person's eyes, a neutral observer's eyes, and even through the eyes of someone viewing the situation days or years later. Each perspective offers different information and triggers different emotional responses. The helicopter view pulls your perspective high above the immediate situation. From this altitude, you see the entire landscape, the context that led to this moment, the broader patterns at play, the likely outcomes of different choices. Individual emotions become less compelling when viewed from sufficient height. The angry person becomes a stressed human having a difficult day rather than a personal threat. Developing helicopter view requires regular practice of mental zooming. During conversations, consciously pull your perspective up and out. See yourself and the other person as tiny figures in a room, in a building, in a city, on a planet. Notice how the emotional intensity diminishes with each level of zoom. The argument that felt overwhelming at ground level seems trivial from orbit. The timeline perspective stretches your view across temporal dimensions. How will this situation look in an hour? Tomorrow? Next month? Next year? In a decade? Most conflicts that feel permanent in the moment become forgotten footnotes in the larger story of life. Negotiators constantly reference this temporal perspective to maintain appropriate emotional investment. The strategic pause creates space between experience and identification. Something happens: an insult, a threat, a criticism. Before identifying with it, "I've been insulted." You pause in the space of pure experience. Words with hostile tone were spoken. This gap prevents automatic emotional identification and maintains the disconnect necessary for strategic response. Extending this pause requires practicing non-identification with all experiences, not just negative ones. When complemented, pause before accepting it as personal validation. When successful, pause before attaching to the achievement. When failing, pause before identifying with the failure. Each pause strengthens your ability to experience without automatically identifying, maintaining the strategic disconnect even during intensity. The anthropologist mindset approaches emotional situations with scientific curiosity rather than personal involvement. You're studying human behavior in its natural habitat. That angry person isn't attacking you, they're displaying fascinating specimens of defensive behavior worth documenting. Their insults aren't personal wounds, they're data about their psychological state and strategic approach. Negotiators develop detailed mental notes like field researchers. Subject exhibits increased blink rate when discussing financial matters, possible indicator of stress or deception. Vocal pitch rises approximately 15% when challenged on factual claims. Defensive posture adopted when topics approach personal responsibility. This observational stance maintains engagement while preventing emotional enmeshment. Role rotation exercises build flexibility in perspective taking. During practice scenarios, negotiators rapidly switch roles, playing themselves, then the subject, then a mediator, then an outside observer, cycling through perspectives every few minutes. This constant shifting prevents lock-in to any single viewpoint and builds the mental agility to maintain strategic disconnect during actual conflicts. The emotional translator function converts raw feelings into useful intelligence without being controlled by them. Fear becomes warning, possible threat detected, recommend increased vigilance. Anger becomes alert, boundary violation occurred, consider assertive response. Sadness becomes note, loss processing activated, temporary vulnerability present. This translation happens through conscious labeling and reframing. Instead of "I'm scared," think "fear signal received," analyzing for valid threat indicators. Instead of "I'm furious," think anger response activated, checking for appropriate action requirements. The emotions still exist and provide information, but they're processed through an analytical filter that prevents impulsive reaction. Boundary visualization creates tangible psychological barriers between you and emotional contagion. Negotiators imagine transparent shields, glass walls, or energy barriers between themselves and hostile individuals. These visualizations aren't denial or avoidance. You still see and hear everything clearly, but they provide psychological protection from emotional infection. The most effective visualizations involve semi-permeable boundaries that allow information through while blocking emotional contamination. Picture a membrane that lets words and data pass while filtering out the emotional charge attached to them. You receive the message, "You're incompetent," as pure information about the speaker's opinion without absorbing the emotional poison intended to accompany it. Decontamination protocols clear emotional residue after intense interactions. Negotiators use specific techniques to discharge absorbed emotions before they can take root. Physical movement, shaking out limbs, rotating shoulders, stretching helps discharge somatic emotional storage. Verbal processing, describing the interaction in clinical terms to a colleague or recorder, externalizes emotions rather than internalizing them. The washing ritual proves particularly effective. After difficult interactions, wash your hands while mentally releasing the emotional content of the conversation. Feel the water carrying away not just physical particles, but emotional residue. This symbolic cleansing, practiced consistently, creates a powerful psychological reset that maintains the strategic disconnect between encounters. Energy economics frames emotional engagement as resource allocation. You have finite emotional energy. Every point of emotional activation costs energy. Strategic disconnect isn't about having no emotions. It's about consciously choosing where to invest emotional energy for maximum return. Getting angry at someone who can't change their behavior is wasted investment. Feeling personally wounded by someone whose opinion doesn't matter is poor resource allocation. Negotiators constantly run cost-benefit analyses on emotional engagement. Will feeling this emotion provide useful information? Will expressing it advance my objectives? Will suppressing it cost more energy than experiencing it? These calculations happen in seconds, determining whether to connect emotionally or maintain strategic disconnect. The witness state represents the deepest level of strategic disconnect, observing not just the situation, but your own observation of it. You watch yourself watching. You notice yourself noticing. This meta awareness creates such psychological distance that emotional overwhelm becomes nearly impossible. You're too busy observing the process of observation to be swept away by the content being observed. Accessing witness state requires progressive awareness layering. First, become aware of the situation. Then become aware of your awareness of the situation. Then become aware of that awareness. Each layer adds distance and perspective, like looking at a reflection of a reflection in parallel mirrors, creating infinite depth that prevents emotional capture. Recovery positioning ensures you can quickly restore strategic disconnect if it slips. Negotiators identify specific physical postures, mental images, or verbal phrases that immediately re-establish professional detachment. Straightening the spine might trigger professional frame. Visualizing the control room might restore observer mode. Thinking interesting data might reactivate clinical perspective. These recovery anchors must be practiced during calm moments until they become reflexive. When you notice emotional enmeshment beginning, the anchor activates automatically, pulling you back to strategic disconnect before full engagement occurs. The faster you can recover disconnect, the less energy you waste on inappropriate emotional investment. Graduated connection allows strategic emotional engagement when useful while maintaining the ability to disconnect instantly. Sometimes showing genuine emotion advances objectives. Expressing real disappointment might motivate behavior change. Showing authentic concern might build trust. The key is choosing connection consciously rather than being forced into it by circumstances. Negotiators practice emotional dimmer switches rather than on-off toggles. They can engage at 20% emotional connection to show humanity without vulnerability. They can increase to 50% when building rapport requires genuine warmth. They can surge to 80% for moments requiring authentic emotional impact. But they always maintain the ability to dial back to zero when strategic disconnect serves better. The maintenance protocol prevents degradation of disconnect abilities over time. Daily exercises maintain the mental muscles of detachment. Spending 5 minutes in pure observer mode during routine activities. Practicing clinical language translation during news consumption. Visualizing boundaries during minor irritations. Without regular maintenance, the ability to strategically disconnect atrophies, leaving you vulnerable to emotional overwhelm when you most need protection. Professional longevity depends on mastering strategic disconnect. Those who can't separate personal from professional burn out within years. Those who master the disconnect can handle decades of intense emotional situations without accumulating damage. They go home at night leaving work emotions at work. They sleep peacefully despite daytime chaos. They maintain rich personal lives unmarred by professional challenges. Strategic disconnect doesn't make you cold, unfeeling, or robotic. It makes you professionally effective while remaining personally protected. You engage fully when appropriate, disconnect completely when necessary, and consciously choose your level of emotional investment based on strategic calculation, rather than reactive impulse. This flexibility, the ability to connect and disconnect at will, represents the highest level of emotional mastery. Chapter 8. Reading the room while running the room. Dual awareness operates like having two separate brains functioning simultaneously, one managing your internal state, while the other tracks everyone else's emotional temperature. Crisis negotiators master this parallel processing because situations can shift from calm to chaos based on subtle changes in group dynamics that single-focused attention would miss. They monitor multiple emotional streams while maintaining their own equilibrium, adjusting their approach in real time based on continuous environmental feedback without losing internal control. The scanning pattern begins before you enter any room. Negotiators pause at doorways for 3 seconds, rapidly cataloging the emotional climate before committing to entry. Who's standing? Who's sitting? Are bodies oriented toward or away from each other? What's the distance between people? Are arms crossed or open? These physical configurations reveal emotional dynamics more accurately than words ever could. Your peripheral vision becomes an emotional radar system, constantly sweeping for changes. While maintaining eye contact with whoever's speaking, you're simultaneously tracking movement, posture shifts, and breathing patterns throughout your visual field. That person to your left who just crossed their arms. Their emotional state just shifted toward defensive. The individual behind you whose breathing became audible. They're approaching their activation threshold. Energy signatures radiate from every person like heat from a flame. Some people pull energy from rooms their presence creates a drain you can physically feel. Others push energy out their intensity fills spaces and pressures boundaries. Still others remain neutral, neither giving nor taking. Negotiators map these energy signatures within seconds of entering a space, identifying who will amplify tensions and who might help stabilize them. The calibration phase happens during initial pleasantries. While exchanging greetings and small talk, negotiators establish baseline readings for everyone present. How fast does each person speak when calm? What's their resting facial expression? Their default posture? Their typical breathing pattern? These baselines become reference points for detecting emotional changes. Variations from baseline indicate rising tensions before they become obvious. Micro-expressions flash across faces for fractions of seconds, revealing true emotions before conscious control suppresses them. The slight nostril flare of anger. The momentary tightening around eyes indicating contempt. The brief lip compression of disagreement. Negotiators train themselves to catch these fleeting signals in their peripheral vision while appearing to focus elsewhere. Reading micro-expressions while managing your own requires specific visual techniques. Soft focus allows you to see entire faces, rather than focusing on specific features. You're not staring at someone's mouth or eyes, you're taking in their whole face simultaneously, like looking at a painting rather than examining individual brushstrokes. This distributed attention catches micro-expressions that focused attention would miss. The emotional contagion map tracks how feelings spread through groups. One person's anxiety infects their neighbor, who transmits it to the next person, creating cascading waves of emotional activation. Negotiators identify the primary transmitters, those whose emotions most strongly influence others, and the natural firebreaks, those who remain stable regardless of surrounding chaos. Breathing synchronization reveals hidden alliances and conflicts. People who feel connected unconsciously match breathing patterns. Those in opposition breathe in contrasting rhythms. Watch a room full of people during tense moments. You'll see clusters breathing together and individuals breathing alone. These respiratory alliances show you who will likely support whom when pressure increases. Voice layering allows you to monitor multiple conversations simultaneously without losing track of any single thread. The skill resembles how musicians hear individual instruments within orchestras. That side conversation happening while someone present. You're tracking both. The whispered exchange during your explanation. You caught it. The tone shift in background chatter. You noticed. Developing voice layering requires progressive training. Start by listening to 2 audio sources simultaneously, perhaps a podcast and music, trying to follow both. Add a 3rd source, then a 4th. Practice in increasingly noisy environments until you can track multiple conversation streams while maintaining your own. This isn't about understanding every word, but about detecting emotional shifts across multiple channels. The pressure map visualizes emotional intensity as topographical features. High pressure zones appear where multiple stressed individuals cluster, or where single highly activated people create local disturbances. Low pressure areas exist where calm individuals provide stability. Negotiators constantly update this mental map, positioning themselves strategically to influence pressure distribution. Movement patterns indicate emotional states more reliably than facial expressions, which people consciously control. Fidgeting increases with anxiety. Stillness often indicates anger building toward explosion. Rhythmic movements suggest self-soothing. Sudden movements indicate surprise or alarm. These bodily telegraphs broadcast emotional states to anyone watching peripherally. The group nervous system operates as a single entity with multiple nodes. When one person's sympathetic nervous system activates, others unconsciously mirror that activation. Heart rates synchronize. Breathing patterns align. Muscle tension spreads. Negotiators monitor this collective nervous system while consciously decoupling their own, maintaining parasympathetic dominance while swimming in a sea of sympathetic activation. Emotional weather systems form and dissipate like actual weather. You can sense the barometric pressure dropping before conflict storms arrive. The atmospheric thickness that precedes heated arguments. The electrical charge building toward confrontation. These environmental sensations aren't mystical. They're your unconscious processing of hundreds of microsignals into coherent patterns. Status dynamics constantly shift through subtle territorial displays. Who takes up more space? Who speaks longest? Who interrupts whom? Who yields floor, and who holds it? These dominance indicators reveal power structures and predict where conflicts will emerge. The person consistently interrupted will eventually explode. The individual denied space will push back. These patterns are as predictable as physics. Coalition detection identifies forming alliances before they solidify. Watch for synchronized nodding. People unconsciously nod together when aligned. Notice seating choices. Allies position themselves for easy eye contact. Observe support patterns. Who verbally reinforces whom. These early coalition signals let you adjust strategy before groups become entrenched. The emotional stack tracks layered feelings beneath surface presentations. Someone might display anger, but underneath lies hurt, and beneath that, fear. Reading these stacks requires watching for incongruencies: angry words with sad eyes, aggressive posture with trembling hands, hostile tone with pleading body language. The deepest emotion in the stack usually drives behavior, not the surface display. Attention flows through groups like water through channels. You can watch it move, everyone looking at one speaker, then shifting to another, then fragmenting into side conversations, then reconverging. Negotiators track these attention currents while strategically directing them. A well-timed pause pulls scattered attention back. A deliberate gesture redirects it. A volume change recaptures it. The metabolic read assesses energy reserves across the room. Exhausted people make different decisions than energized ones. Hungry individuals are more reactive. Overcaffeinated participants oscillate between hyperactivity and crashes. Negotiators factor these metabolic states into their approach, sometimes calling breaks not because they need them, but because they've detected metabolic depletion affecting group dynamics. Emotional velocities vary across individuals. Some people escalate from calm to rage in seconds. Others build slowly over hours. Knowing each person's emotional velocity lets you predict when interventions are needed. That person who's been gradually building for 20 minutes. They're approaching critical mass. The individual who seems calm, but has rapid escalation history. They require constant monitoring. The intervention calculator determines when and how to adjust room dynamics. If 3 people are at 6.0 activation and rising, but 2 others remain at 3.0, you might leverage the calm individuals to stabilize the activated ones. If everyone except you exceeds 7.0, you might need to call a break. If one person hits 9.0 while others stay moderate, you might need to separate that individual. Linguistic patterns reveal emotional states through word choice changes. People use shorter sentences when stressed. They speak in absolutes when angry: always, never, everyone, no one. They ask more questions when anxious. They make more statements when confident. Tracking these linguistic shifts across multiple speakers reveals the room's emotional trajectory. The echo chamber effect amplifies emotions when similar states reinforce each other. 3 anxious people together become more anxious than any would alone. 2 angry individuals fuel each other's rage. Negotiators break echo chambers by introducing contrasting emotional states: calm into anxiety, curiosity into anger, humor into tension. Proxemic intelligence reads the meaning in spatial relationships. The distance between people indicates comfort levels. Body orientation shows engagement or withdrawal. Height positioning reveals power dynamics. These spatial configurations change constantly, and each change signals emotional shifts that verbal communication won't reveal for minutes. The auxiliary awareness system maintains background monitoring, while foreground attention handles primary tasks. Like a computer running multiple programs, you're simultaneously tracking room dynamics, managing your internal state, processing conversation content, and planning responses. This parallel processing prevents tunnel vision that makes you miss critical emotional shifts. Practicing auxiliary awareness starts with simple dual tasking. Read while monitoring your peripheral environment. Hold conversations while tracking background sounds. Write while staying aware of movement around you. Each practice session strengthens the neural networks that enable true dual awareness during high-stakes situations. Social mirroring patterns reveal influence networks. People unconsciously mimic those they respect or fear. Watch for posture echoes, gesture repetitions, and phrase adoptions. The most mirrored person holds the most influence. Understanding these mirroring patterns lets you identify key influencers whose emotional states will propagate through groups. The thermal read doesn't require actual temperature measurement, but trains you to sense the heat of emotional activation. Angry people literally generate more heat. Anxious individuals create a different energetic signature than fearful ones. With practice, you can walk into a room and feel its emotional temperature as distinctly as its physical temperature. Cluster dynamics track how subgroups form and dissolve during interactions. 3 people might align against 2 others, then split into different configurations as topics change. These shifting alliances create complex emotional currents that affect everyone present. Negotiators map these clusters continuously, predicting where fractures will appear and where bonds will strengthen. The regulation ripple documents how your emotional control affects others. When you maintain calm below 4.0, people around you unconsciously downregulate. Your steady breathing patterns influence theirs. Your relaxed posture triggers mirror neuron responses that relax their muscles. You become a stabilizing force that dampens emotional waves rather than amplifying them. Output monitoring tracks how your interventions affect room dynamics. Did your statement increase or decrease tension? Did your posture shift trigger defensive responses? Did your voice tone soothe or agitate? This real-time feedback lets you adjust your approach continuously, fine-tuning your output based on its measured impact. The overload protocol activates when room complexity exceeds processing capacity. Sometimes there's too much happening, too many emotional streams, too much conflict, too many variables to track. Negotiators have predetermined responses for overload situations. Narrow focus to key players, simplify objectives, or call strategic breaks to reset. Environmental manipulation subtly adjusts physical space to influence emotional dynamics. Opening windows increases oxygen and reduces tension. Adjusting lighting affects mood. Rearranging seating changes power dynamics. These environmental tweaks seem minor, but create measurable changes in group emotional states. The diagnostic sequence rapidly assesses room dynamics during entry. Scan faces 2 seconds. Note body positions 2 seconds. Assess energy levels 2 seconds. Identify key players 2 seconds. Detect emotional currents 2 seconds. This 10-second assessment provides enough information to begin strategic engagement while continuing to gather data. Synchronous management requires maintaining your internal state while responding to external dynamics like juggling while solving math problems. Your emotional regulation continues automatically, while your conscious attention handles room dynamics. This split functionality requires extensive practice, but becomes second nature with repetition. The field theory approach views rooms as emotional force fields where every person exerts influence on every other person. Your position in this field affects what influences you feel and what influence you can exert. Strategic positioning, physical and psychological, optimizes your ability to monitor and influence while maintaining your own stability. Cross-current navigation handles conflicting emotional streams within the same space. The front of the room might be angry, while the back is anxious. The left side might be engaged, while the right is checked out. Navigating these cross-currents requires acknowledging all streams without being pulled into any single one. The stability anchor technique involves identifying the calmest person present and subtly aligning with their energy. This doesn't mean ignoring others, but using that stable individual as a reference point that helps you maintain equilibrium. When you feel yourself being pulled into chaos, reconnecting with that anchor person restores balance. Mastery of dual awareness transforms you into an emotional conductor, orchestrating room dynamics while maintaining perfect internal pitch. You read every player while running your own game. You absorb information from multiple streams while maintaining singular focus. You influence the emotional climate while remaining unaffected by it. This capability, simultaneously observing and directing, receiving and transmitting, managing self and others, represents the peak performance level of emotional control.